what they do every day and how important it is.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. Secretary Noem, on May 5th, the Customs and Border Patrol, Border Protection, CBP, quietly rescinded, I'm not sure it's even been reported, their, quote, processing of pregnant and postpartum non-citizens and infants, end quote, policy, which was issued on January 28th, 2022, citing it as, quote, obsolete or misaligned with current agency guidance and...
This may look like a routine oversight exchange, but it's actually a stress test of how power is exercised when policy decisions are made quietly and accountability is demanded publicly. What's really being tested here is whether administrative efficiency can override fundamental standards of care inside federal systems. This raises broader questions about how priorities are set. Who defines alignment, and what happens when enforcement goals intersect with human obligations? In this video, we'll break down how a single policy reversal exposes deeper tensions between oversight, executive discretion, and institutional responsibility.
What they do every day and how important it is.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. Secretary Noem, on May 5th, the Customs and Border Patrol, Border Protection, CBP, quietly rescinded, I'm not sure it's even been reported, their, quote, processing of pregnant and postpartum non-citizens and infants, end quote, policy, which was issued on January 28th, 2022, citing it as, quote, obsolete or misaligned with current agency guidance and immigration enforcement policies. That January 28th policy memorandum followed years of inadequate care documented by a report from the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security showing that the treatment of pregnant, postpartum, and nursing women and infants was just horrendously and horrifically inadequate. And a recent site visit by Senate Judiciary Committee staff confirmed that this problem is continuing, that pregnant women being detained do not have access to adequate health care. Do you agree or disagree that babies and pregnant women within CBP and ICE custody should receive care that are tailored to their specific needs? And why, in God's name, would that policy be rescinded providing that care?
Well, Senator, I will look at the specifics of that policy and what was changed as of May 5th. I would say that everybody that's incarcerated or is brought into custody and is in a detention center is receiving appropriate care, and that we are making accommodations for individuals that have different physical situations or pregnancy.
It's not happening.
And so I will look at the specific policies as to why one of the requirements may have been changed or adapted. If you have a specific to point out, that would be fantastic.
You don't know about this policy?
I do know about the policy change, but I've looked at the guidelines of how we handle individuals that are pregnancy.
You do know about the policy change. How could you allow it to happen?
Well, sir, what are you finding wrong with what we do with individuals who are pregnant that are in our detention centers? Is there concerns I should be addressing?
Women who are pregnant or who have just had a child and their infant babies are not receiving adequate medical care.
Everybody receives medical care. Everybody receives medical care that is in our custody, and even if they are going to be returned, even if they're going to be returned back to their home country, we are making sure that they have medical care in their home country before they are sent there. So that is something that we do very diligently, is to make sure that anybody who has a medical issue, a concern, something that needs to be addressed is taken care of in those detention centers.
Is factually untrue.
No, it's actually
but more important. You permitted a policy to be rescinded that provides for adequate care because it was, quote, obsolete or misaligned with your agency's guidance and immigration enforcement priorities. How can you sit here and tell us that caring for pregnant women or infants or women postpartum is misaligned with your priorities?
Yeah, everyone who's in our care and in our detention centers receives medical care that is appropriate to them and their specific condition. Absolutely, that is happening.
You're about to lose a fifth of your workforce in FEMA, correct?
There are individuals in FEMA that are no longer working with us. They may have taken early retirement or deferred retirement.
How are you going to meet the needs of our constituents in Missouri or Connecticut, which suffered floods recently? I saw FEMA in action then, as I've seen them over the years. They are dedicated, vigorous public servants. They appear and spend hours and days and weeks caring for people. You're losing a fifth of them, including most of the leadership. What's your plan to replace
We've got
them?
many people in FEMA that do very good work every day taking care of people that are in a crisis situation, that are experiencing the worst day of their lives. The problem is that over the years and under the Biden administration, they failed the American people.
You're not
They didn't
answering my question,
Oh, I
Madam
absolutely
Secretary.
am.
How are you going to replace a workforce
You can't
that is
convince me that
absolutely
any
essential
federal government
to
agency does a better
helping the
job just because it has more
constituents in
people.
Missouri? You
More
just
people
committed
does
to
not
help them.
equal
You're not going
a
to be
better
able to
job.
help
Better
people in
job is
Connecticut
accountability to
or
people and
in
making sure we're
Missouri
taking
or
care
anywhere
of
in the
them.
country if you don't have the dedicated public servants in FEMA and you're losing them.
Time has expired. Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Secretary, I saw the proposed budget, and it showed a decrease for FEMA.
Just moments ago in this hearing, a simple but devastating question cut through the room. Senator Blumenthal looked directly at the secretary and asked, "How could you allow that to happen?" It was not a rhetorical flourish. It was a demand for accountability. A demand rooted in policy decisions quietly reversed, protections withdrawn, and responsibility deflected. What unfolded in that exchange was not just a disagreement over administrative guidance. It was a revealing portrait of how power responds when confronted with human consequence. The senator laid out the facts with precision. On May 5th, Customs and Border Protection reversed a policy designed to ensure appropriate care for pregnant and postpartum detainees. A policy issued in early 2022, shaped by years of documented failures and reinforced by findings from the Department of Homeland Security's own Inspector General. The reason given for rescinding it was chilling in its bureaucratic calm. It was deemed obsolete or misaligned with current enforcement priorities. Those words echoed through the hearing room because they exposed a deeper truth about how governance can lose its moral compass when priorities are framed narrowly and mechanically. What made this moment so powerful was not just what was said, but what was missing. When asked why such a policy would be reversed, the secretary did not offer a clear explanation. Instead, we heard assurances, general statements. Repeated claims that everybody receives medical care. Yet the senator pressed further, citing site visits, staff findings, and continued reports that adequate care was not being delivered. This was not a debate over abstractions. It was a confrontation between documented oversight findings and official reassurance, between evidence and institutional reflex. This exchange reveals a recurring tension at the heart of American governance. On one side, lawmakers charged with oversight, armed with reports, inspections, and firsthand accounts. On the other, executive officials leaning on broad assurances and internal guidelines, often unwilling or unable to confront the consequences of policy shifts in plain terms. When Senator Blumenthal asked how care for pregnant detainees could ever be considered misaligned with enforcement priorities, he was asking something larger. He was asking whether efficiency has replaced humanity as a governing value. The answer he received was telling. There was no acknowledgement of error, no admission that rescinding protections might have created gaps. Instead, there was deflection toward process, toward future review, toward the idea that concerns could be addressed if made more specific. But oversight does not work when responsibility is endlessly postponed. Accountability does not survive when leaders insist that systems are functioning properly even as inspectors and staff report otherwise. As the hearing moved forward, the conversation widened. Senator Blumenthal shifted to FEMA, pointing out that nearly a fifth of its workforce may be lost, including much of its leadership. Once again, the pattern repeated. Praise for dedicated public servants was offered, but concrete plans were not. The senator asked how communities facing floods and disasters would be served without experienced staff. The response turned political, redirecting blame rather than addressing capacity. What this sequence showed was not just a policy dispute, but a governing style that resists specificity when stakes are highest. Taken together, these moments expose a dangerous erosion of accountability. When policies are rescinded quietly, when oversight findings are minimized, when questions about care, readiness, and capacity are met with generalized confidence rather than clear answers. This is how public trust frays, not in dramatic collapse, but in incremental deflection. in the steady normalization of "we'll look into it" as a substitute for responsibility. The American system depends on friction between branches of government. Oversight is not an inconvenience, it is a constitutional necessity. When senators press officials on policy reversals and staffing losses, they are not playing politics. They are performing a duty owed to the public. And when answers fall short, that failure matters. Because behind every policy memo and staffing chart are real lives affected by those decisions, whether through inadequate care or delayed disaster response. This hearing reminds us that leadership is not measured by how confidently assurances are delivered, but by how transparently consequences are confronted. It is easy to claim that systems are working. It is harder to explain why protections were removed, why warnings were ignored, and why accountability seems perpetually deferred. That gap between words and reality is where public faith is tested. In the end, Senator Blumenthal's question lingers because it has not been answered. How could this be allowed to happen? How could care be labeled misaligned? How can agencies meet their obligations while losing experienced staff? These are not partisan questions. They are moral ones. And until they are met with clarity rather than deflection, they will continue to haunt the institutions meant to serve the public. This is why oversight matters. This is why hearings matter. And this is why independent analysis matters more than ever. If you believe accountability should not be optional, if you believe transparency is essential to democracy, then support our work. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA and stand with us as we continue to expose the truth and demand answers where power would rather remain silent.